You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
70% of your brain is fight or flight. So you've got the odds stacked against you as soon as you open your eyes in the morning. Only 30% of your brain is designed for creativity, logical thinking, higher thinking, any of that. So you're either stuck in one or the other.
Good afternoon, good day, good evening. I don't know what time you're listening or where you're listening from. It's your boy, your host, Ron Tillman, and you are with me for another episode of Walk in Victory. Speaking of victory, walk.
Warning, this is a public service announcement. The Walk in Victory podcast is where we have conversations purposed to evolve lives. You may not want to evolve. Then tune into another bleeping podcast. Everyone else, enjoy the show. And here's our host.
Good afternoon, good day, good evening. I don't know what time you're listening and or where you're listening from. It's your boy, your host, Ron Tillman, and you are with me for another episode of Walk in Victory. Speaking of victory walks, today we're going to have a conversation about mindset and really the advancement that has come so far along, where there was talks before about person's brain being fully developed in their pre-adolescent years, and that's it. So really, I grew up in the projects. We grew up without having any. We had lack of resources. Let's just put it that way. And when someone hears that, they're like, "Wow!" And they hear me talk now, or they hear my story now. Like, oh wow, you kind of like made it out. Oh, it becomes like a legendary story, right? Because the mindset of the people that are listening to my past or have a set idea of the type of people that come from those types of beginnings, with the information that was available, is like, well, what did you do? It's like, how did you get over, or how did you become? And those questions are real. And sometimes you have to stop and really ask yourself, like, what was my journey like? And when I'm trying to tell a story, I don't like for people to pine over me, I don't like to be made feel as if I'm some super character or something like that. So there's certain things that we don't talk about. And sometimes, depending on the part of your life you do highlight some things that that may be a little bit negative, because, maybe pitching an audience, you may be doing something. So how to tell that story. But what happens is, when I got introduced to mindfulness practices and yoga movements and mindfulness, along with my biblical stuff that I had, you realize that the brain didn't stop developing, because there's things that I've learned in the last 10 years that I wish I'd have known, and who doesn't wish that their older selves knew more when they were younger, right? We don't have that opportunity, but what we do have is the opportunity to create new narratives, to create new perspectives. And the funny part about neuroplasticity and neuropathways is that the old us is still there, right? The old us may be dead, right? And so I often tell people, in order to see yourself healed, you got to see the person that's not healed as gone. But that voice of the non-healed person still lives in the same place that the voice of the healed person lives, right? In order for us to see ourselves financially free, we have to let go of a certain kind of impoverished mindset. But the impoverished, spontaneous spender still lives there. And every now and again, the spontaneous spender lifts up their hand and say, hey, don't forget about me. And you go out and you make impulse purchases and you do certain things that you feel as if you've overcame. So, but that pathway is smaller, and or the voice on the pathway is much smaller than it was. It's not the most dominant voice. So when you create new pathways, when you create new mindset shifts, when you're going from worker to entrepreneur, uh, those things, the worker voice gets muted. But in the beginning, you become the main worker, and you don't just walk in with an entrepreneur mindset. You work for yourself, and that and you find out that that work may be a little bit harder, and it's not as sometimes as rewarding, because I might not be able to get paid every 2 weeks. I might have to wait a month. I might have to chase an invoice down. I might have to sacrifice in order to get more material. So
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
it shifts, and these shifts cause um not many voices, but it can cause many voices. So when we go to meditate, we hear all of these little voices rustling around in our heads, and if we don't really take time to quiet the mind, see how like I'm rambling, and quiet the mind, and then boom, something happens. And when we take the time to quiet the mind, all of those voices no longer sound like a cookout in the African American community during the 4th of July, when everybody's talking and playing spades or dominoes and libations are flowing and everybody is loud, right? Because it can get real loud and noisiest in the head. And then we start to feel like we're imposters because, yeah, I have this success, but then I have this voice in my head saying that I'm not worthy of it. And we're going to talk about all of those things today with our guest. Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm awesome, Naran. It's such a treat to finally catch up.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind, tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do or would like to share.
Sure. Well, I think really, I often like to describe myself as a failed Agatha Christie. You know, when I was growing up, all I wanted to do was be the next queen of mystery. And throughout my corporate career and legal career, I wrote all these books, Neuron, which must have been truly awful because no one wanted to publish them. But I kept that flame in my heart, and I actually don't use the term failure. It's something I tried that didn't work out. But after I had built many successful businesses as an entrepreneur, I became diagnosed with very aggressive breast cancer, and everything had to stop. And I feel very blessed that I'm still here. But when I was going to my favorite place, which was the bookstore, I noticed that no one wrote about how cancer survivors thought. There was lots of raw veggie diets and meditation and single survival stories, but nothing about what goes on inside your head when you're diagnosed with cancer. Your statistics, I think mine were I had a 21% survival rate. Someone helpfully told me what goes on inside your head. So I wrote a book called Secrets of Cancer Survivors, and I interviewed different kinds of survivors just to find out what they thought. And I became, after 20 years of writing terrible books about bodies in libraries, on boats, and everywhere else, I became that overnight success. And Secrets was published in 8 countries and did really well. And I subsequently wrote a book about how happy children thought along similar lines. Had to take a business career break and then came back with my latest book, Feeling Forwards, which has been endorsed by Tony Robbins. And now I lecture on entrepreneurship. I'm doing my doctorate in the connection between quantum physics and the mindset of elite athletes compared with entrepreneurship, and so many things.
So when we talk about the mindset of an elite athlete, I often reference losers mentality because I root for the Jets, I root for the Mets, I root for the Knicks. So I can write a story about so making up ways to lose, right? But when we see a team that's built with athletes that have overcame so much and have this superior athletic mind to everyone else, but when they come together collectively in that organization, they start to develop these habits that are bad, and they create a culture where losing persists, and it's like they call them curses or whatever the fans might label it as, and to whereas like where they say, oh, that's the Mets being the Mets, or that's the Jets being the Jets, and how to reshape or to reform even in elite athletes that thing where they're no longer losing. And I'll give you a more case in point. LeBron, when he first came, he would have the jips when he was trying to do free throws at the end of the game, or he would pass up last quarter shots because he didn't want to feel as if the losing was on him. What's going on in that brain where the brain is highly effective, but then in certain parts it becomes jittery?
Oh, look, there's so much there. I think one of the first thing that happens when an athlete makes it, which is not really making it, it's just the first step, which is when they get drafted by the NFL or baseball or in AFL in my home country of Australia. That's our football league. The interesting thing is, and I've seen this firsthand through my work and also through my youngest son, who has whose friends that I'd known since they were very small were picked first and second in the football draft in Australia. And what happens when you observe the kids at this level is they go from either being the best in the school or the best in their club to one of the best. And depending on the mindset they've built up, and particularly the family mindset, that can be really, really difficult
Mhm.
because they're not the rock star anymore that they were at school. And you have all these beautiful proms and all these things we don't have that really celebrate being popular and successful and whatever at that level, and all of a sudden they don't have that anymore. So you have that as your first overlay. I interviewed a really interesting guy who was excuse me, who was a chiropractor for a lot of college football. And he said what he found so interesting was the kids who, and the system's slightly different here, but the kids who came from the projects, who came from the wrong side of the tracks, who had overcome so many life obstacles, let alone sporting obstacles, to get into college, into an elite college, their muscles healed faster
Mhm.
than the kids who hadn't come from the projects, who hadn't had to overcome abusive parents or absent parents or whatever else. And I unpacked that from a neuroscience perspective. I thought, oh, that is so interesting. And I unpacked it from a neuroscience perspective. And a lot of it is to do with language. So I thought, okay, so what is the key difference? You've got two kids, they've both done their ACL, whatever. The kid that has had to fight so hard just to be there, his language will be different because it's not the first time that he's had an obstacle. It's not the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Whereas the kid that hasn't had those obstacles, I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end. I'll never get that $120 million contract. So there's that aspect of it. And then what the term you used was what? The loser mentality. Yeah. Well, you see, you get all these guys and girls, and you put them into a pressure cooker, and then you see what happens in terms of who gets to dominate or what gets to dominate.
Mm.
And then you've got the coach's mindset as well. Are they a half full, half glass? Thank heavens there's not too many dinosaurs out there now that just believe the louder you yell, the better the guys play. But it's very, very difficult. We had a really beautiful example, and it happens to be my football team, the Richmond Tigers, who really had gone nowhere for about 35 years. So They weren't. They were bottom of the ladder very regularly. We used to go as a family to the football, and sometimes my youngest would cry, and I think, why? Why am I doing this? This is so terrible. But what they did, they took a really interesting mindset approach. They brought in Brené Brown to talk about vulnerability, and they got the team to open up and be very, very vulnerable. And one player, who I don't know who it is because they kept their confidence, one player stood up and said, "Guys, I really struggle reading. You do these plays on the board. I'm really struggling to understand. I actually really need help with that." And the next thing they did, apart from building a circle of trust that was not non-competitive within the team, the next thing they did was they had a couple of key sayings. And one of them was, "Our best football is ahead of us."
Mm.
They clung to that. So they went from nowhere, sobbing children, to they won the premiership, I think it was 3 times in 4 years, including during COVID. Now, a lot of those players are older and they've since retired, and as inevitably happens, every football team goes through a cycle. But it was a really, really interesting example because another team that got defeated by my Tigers, when they went to boot camp, and every competitive team has a boot camp before season starts, right? On their boot camp, allegedly, they played the Tigers' winning theme song constantly. They got players to be vulnerable and then breached their confidence and belittled them. And that club was so destroyed, it went from being runner-up to bottom of the league for several years, just because in a different way, that loser mindset was applied so appallingly and really rewired their brains for the worst.
Yeah, because when it becomes a job, right, and I'm just coming in and exchange it, the passion is not there to win, right? I'm just there to collect my check. I'm just there to do it. And those we're all in the same league, but the mentalities are different. Like
Mm.
that I love that example from people who have come through a lot more of that adversity. The bodies heal faster because they're like, man, first of all, it's a survivor thing. I gotta get up because somebody's gonna take my job. You know,
Yeah. I've
can't
got
lay
too
down.
many people depending on.
Yeah, can't lay down forever, right? So when we talk about developing new pathways, that one being vulnerable, but what would you say to those people who are always thinking of futuristic and not really thinking in the present? When we because everyone comes in and they have the same goal. Oh, we're gonna win. And we all start out and we have our training camps, boot camps, right? And we're all in the same room together. We're watching our plays, we're doing it, and it's starting to click. And in our mind, we're doing well. And then we go take our stuff on the field against another team who's excelling way past than we do. And it was like, well, what are we doing wrong, right? And you start to think futuristically as opposed to thinking in the presence. What happens when the brain is either thinking in the past, oh, this is the same way we lost 2 years ago, or thinking in the present, or thinking in the future, oh man, why can't we be like them? Or I can't wait till we get a new coach or wherever, or I can't wait for vacation because sometimes they check out and they're just thinking about vacation or the party after the game and not being present and really taking in um, what their assignments are.
That's a beautiful question, and there's so much in there. I think, firstly, you need to understand that as human beings, our brains we're binary. There's 2 speeds. It's a bit like a car with an automatic transmission. You've got the accelerator and you've got the brake. What happens when you press both of them at the same time? It's a disaster. You blow up your car, right? So a lot of people, what's not necessarily taught, which is such vital information, is your brain only has 2 speeds.
Hmm.
Now, 70% of your brain is designed for fear. 70% of your brain is fight or flight. So you've got the odds stacked against you as soon as you open your eyes in the morning. Only 30% of your brain is designed for creativity, logical thinking, higher thinking, any of that. So you're either stuck in one or the other. And people that talk about, you know, a dose of positivity. I say to my coaching clients, okay, if I give you a cup of coffee, great cup of coffee, I love my coffee, great cup of coffee, but I just put 1 drop of arsenic in it. You got a whole cup of coffee, there's only 1 drop of arsenic, you'll be okay, right? No, it's either coffee or it's arsenic, okay? You're either positive or negative. So when you talk about being in the present, and this is where I love to talk about quantum, you can actually be in any present you choose. You can be in the present with the fight or flight, or you can be in the present with creativity, higher function, creating the future you want to enjoy. And it's interesting you talk about losing a lot. And let's face it, sport is a win or lose game. But I would argue the truly great athletes and teams understand you can win and play really badly. You can win in a really not so great way. And you see that, on even on the tennis court, which is more gladiatorial, particularly in singles tennis, where someone can intimidate the other player. We see it. Cricket is on at the moment. I know cricket's a bit of a weird sport in America and not very popular, but hugely popular here. And you have all the sledging that goes on behind the scenes, the insulting the players while they're on the ground, which is really not cool, but it can be a way to win. So I think when you're talking about being the present, the key is, and what I lecture and coach about is, okay, let's create the present you want rather than living in the present that you feel you've been given or you have to live because of your past. I have a dear friend in the States, and we went last time I was in LA. He took me to some of the beaches and we had a beautiful walk and we were having a great day. And he's someone I admire enormously. And he said, well, it's just been 30 years of guilt and shame. I said, okay, 30 years, that's a long time. He said, yeah, I've been in therapy for 30 years because I can't get over the guilt and shame that my mother didn't want me when I was 9 years old and I went to live with my aunt and uncle, which actually turned out really well. Sometimes that's not such a good news story, but they loved him like their own, and they gave him a beautiful childhood that his mother felt or didn't feel the need to give him. And he was talking about the therapy he'd been doing for 30 years, which, firstly, I worried about the impact if he was still in therapy after 30 years. And I said to him, and thinking back through cancer, and I've had a few other catastrophes in my life. I had a psychopath invade my home and want to kill my children, a few bit of stuff going on. I said, look, you know, James, I can go back to the past. I just don't choose to live there. If I need to, I'll go back, but otherwise, I don't need to live there. So when you're talking about the present, it becomes, you can either see it as a complex minefield where am I in the present as a cancer survivor and this and that or the other, or am I in the present as, goodness, what miracles do I want to happen today? What do I want to create today? And I have a ritual in the morning that I teach my clients. One of the first questions is, what will I do today that I will be grateful for in my future? What's the one thing? And it may be as simple as not sleeping in. It may be as easy as I'm going to do the one extra rep at the gym, or I'm going to smile at a stranger. That's the beauty about the present. The present is a gift. That's why it's called the present. You can have any present you want.
I like the fact that you said the present is a gift, but the thing that resonates with me is that you can have any present you want. And I think even for me, being in the mindfulness space for so long, we talk about being present and what it means to be present. But the way that you were able to distinguish, and I think that we need to use our action words, right? That we don't want to be in the present. We don't want to be present with our misery, with whatever is paining us. We want to shift our thought processes and be present with the future that we desire to see. And that's important because words does matter. Words matter because words have high impact, and especially when people are thinking. Most of our customers, clients, they have somebody who told them, "Hey, man, you'll never walk again," or "Hey, you'll never amount to anything." And I had to learn
Exactly.
that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. So when you were dealing with your bout with cancer, and you had to deal with the mindset of healing throughout the process, what was some of the things that you learned, and do you think that that experience in your journey helped you
Mm,
to land in this path that we're in now?
absolutely. I mean, I learned so much. I want to preface talking about cancer though with just a bit of a caveat, in as much that there are many speakers and many authors that will say, "I'm so glad I had cancer
Mhm.
because I learned all these things." I'm not glad I had cancer.
Thank you
I
for
think
being
I
honest.
was a pretty cool person before I had cancer, and I'm pretty sure I would have been a pretty cool person without having it. But what I did learn was a lot was about mindset, and my overlay, apart from the fact it was very aggressive, and breast cancer is worse the younger you are. I also had two small children under 5,
Mm,
and I had a marriage that was falling apart. And what scared me more than dying was the fact that no one would I was not confident my partner at the time would talk about me to the children, and they would grow up without knowing how much I loved them, and that was the kicker. So what I really did was I didn't behave like a typical cancer patient at all, and you probably worked out by now I'm a bit contrarian, but I didn't do the support groups. I didn't do a whole stack of things because I didn't want to be in that cancer world. I didn't want to be a cancer patient. I wanted to be a cancer survivor. So I worked the whole way through. I was at that time I was very successful. I built a national partnership, and I was one of the two founding partners of that business, and we expanded into every state. So I worked full time. I spent every moment I could with the children, and I learned the strength we have in our mind, because when you're in a life or death situation, and I want to reach out to everyone who's listening to this podcast who is in a really tough place. Your tough place is just the same as my tough place. There's no degree of hard. Whatever hardship you're going through is just really, really hard. So when you're going through that, I learned that I had to almost be like I used to think of a Spartan or a gladiator, standing at one part of my mind. And really now I specialize in neuroplasticity. I understand what I did. I did not let that fear part of my mind open up. As far as I was concerned, there was a big gateway, and I did not open it. And that's easier said than done. And I think the challenge becomes, when I wrote the book, I talked about I talked about cancer survivors get very, very good at compartmentalizing everyone around them, everyone who supports them, and everyone who can drag them down. But the dangerous part actually comes when you're through with cancer and life goes back to normal. Because what happens then is you get comfortable.
mm,
When everything's going okay, when things are going quite well, that's actually more dangerous than when you've got your back against the wall and you have to decide where your integrity starts and finishes and what kind of impression you want to leave in the world. When everything's going okay and even comfortable, and even you've reached 90% of the success you wanted to achieve, that's when your mindset can actually get quite sloppy. And that's when, yeah, you could do more, but the challenge isn't necessarily there. And then you'll have people around you saying, but you've already got so much. You don't need any more. You don't need to do this. You've already written 3 books. Why do you need to write another one? That becomes a new level post catastrophe, hardship, all of that, to then take stock and then start building again from the ground up. Okay, I'm going to be out of fight or flight because Being comfortable is a version of being in fear because it's okay where I am. Why should I do any more? Why should I go to the extra mile? And that's one of the lessons that cancer taught me about having that ironclad mindset, but then taking that mindset out of when you are in crisis and you are in hardship and using it to push you to the next level.
It's funny that you would say that because you are studying athletes, and one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a high percentage of athletes that once they retire, you see them, they're overweight. They're they don't look. They walk in the room, they say, "Oh, that guy played basketball." They're like, he played basketball, because there's a
Really?
part there's a part of a sense of complacency because the goal was to get here, and we made it there. And the goal is longevity, and we may have had longevity, or I'm being blown a knee, or whatever happened throughout the career. And then there's no one there standing at the other side of that to give them this conversation that we're having right now. As you're studying this, what are you finding? What's happening to the mind once we reach our goals and the complacency settles in? What's going on there scientifically?
Really interesting. I'm so glad you've raised that. It's what I call the post-success blues.
Oh, wow.
And in feeling, yeah. And look, I mean, it's one. I think it was your beautiful swimmer. Was it Michael Phelps or another athlete talked about sliding into depression
Mhm.
on the podium when the gold medal was being put around their neck. So what I do in my coaching, and this is a neuroscience based approach, is I don't talk about goals. I talk about aims.
Mm.
The problem with goals, and I know goals are almost held up, it's like positive thinking. They're held up as this gold standard. But the problem with a goal is it can be really, really rigid and it can really stunt your growth. So, to give an accessible example, with a younger person, let's say someone wants to go to medical school. And let's say they really do want to go to medical school. It's not necessarily their parents. Um, they really want to go to medical school and they miss out. And if you approach it from a goal mentality, they have failed. Their goal was to go to medical school and they failed. But if you take a feeling forwards approach and you look at their aim, you sit down with them. And I did sit down with a friend's son who was just devastated. I said, okay, so what was it that you wanted to go to medical school about? Was it you were going to earn lots of money? Fine. That you're going to have social status? Great. Did you want to cure a particular disease? Did you want to make people feel better? And I mean, once you look at it from that approach, there could be at least a multitude of reasons or a combination of reasons why you would want to go to medical school. So he came up with his reasons, which were, quite diverse. And I said, okay, so let's look at the medical field. Uh, Without being a doctor, how else could you achieve that aim?
Mm.
Or how could you achieve that aim in business? And we just completely reframed it rather than, and thank heavens, he did find a path and is very happy and fulfilled because otherwise he was just going to be the guy that didn't get into medical school. So the other technique I teach, apart from distinguishing between a goal and an aim, and 90% of the time, and I don't care what acronym you use, whether it's SMART goals or accessible goals or whatever, it eventually gets boiled down into a to-do list. And, don't reckon Napoleon or Julius Caesar or Winston Churchill inspired the world and conquered countries with a to-do list. They did it because they had an aim and a passion. So that's the first part of the equation. The second part of the equation is what you do when you're accessing quantum physics and projecting yourself into the future is you're actually working backwards. So if I'm sitting down with someone with really granular goals, it's like, okay, so let's say you achieve all your goals. Fantastic. It happens. What person are you on the other side of that? Because that's the person you have to work towards being. And I remember when Tom Brady decided not to retire. Huge Tom Brady fan in terms of what he has achieved, his mindset, read his health books, really interesting guy. But when he chose not to retire, I thought, oh, I hope you've had someone sitting with you for about the last 5 years, because that is how long it would take to reinvent and reimagine your mindset from not being the GOAT of football. I hope you've had someone in your corner that said, okay, who's going to be the Tom 5 years after retirement? Because we have to start building that Tom now, because otherwise it's going to be a crash, and there just will be. And so, to answer your question about the person that was an elite athlete and everyone goes, really? When they walk into the room, they didn't have someone, or they didn't have access to the principles, which was, okay, who are you going to be? You see it with even, senior executives, male and female, that retire and are completely lost. My husband's one of the businesses we built together was a financial advice and accounting business. And as a financial advisor, and everyone comes in and says, oh, we're going to retire. It's so exciting. And he said, okay, so after you've done the big overseas trip and you've fixed up all your kids' homes and you've built a deck out the back and you've done that, what are you going to do next? And they look at him and say,
I don't know.
first, how did you know that was on our to-do list? And secondly, what do you mean? What's after that?
Yeah, because we that's amazing. I'm going to add that. You just gave me something to add to my coaching. Just helping people prepare for success. One of the things
Mm,
that I've personally had to endure, like when everyone else deems that you're successful and you've reached a level, and you start slipping into bad habits or doing things because you're like, I'm here now. Now what? You know what I mean? Because there's no level of excitement, and I mirror this to relationships. And sometimes when I'm counseling couples or talking to couples, and I say it's communication is important in any relationship. But when you're planning a wedding, buying a new home, the communication is at an all-time high. And every night you're calling, you're picking out, you're meeting at the Home Depot, you're meeting with contractors, and there's a spark there, there's an energy, there's a synergy, and now the project is over. And now, because
yeah.
that has been the goal, right? And we take that away, we really don't know how to communicate outside of that, because that's been our goal. So how do we constantly uh, remind the brain that, yeah, this is the aim, and this is a part of the entire aim, which is good communication, not good communication centered around an event, good communication centered around a project, and things like that. Because the brain is funny. It will, it will, if you don't, if you're not practicing mindfulness, then you're allowing your brain to dictate your responses. And we do respond 90% from a negative bias. And when we slip into that place, you may want to have a communication, or you may want to communicate to your spouse, and then brain's like, every time you say something, she doesn't respond the way that you want to respond. And then you say something, and then you put that into your future, and then boom, reinforce it. See, look. And that other person doesn't even
Mm,
know that you're having this conversation with yourself.
yes.
How do you help people to stay in positive present communication wise, also with themselves?
Mm. I think this is a harder situation to be in than any other time in human history.
Yeah.
We are the most distracted we have ever been. And the challenge with being distracted is you can lose touch with yourself.
Mm.
And I work a lot with entrepreneurs, applying all the principles I've learned from elite sport. And it's very hard for them to separate themselves from their product. And I've had to work at that. I'm at the stage now where if you like my book, that's great. If you don't like my book, that's great. I'm not my book. I know I will never be my work. But that's something that you have to work through and really understand who you are at your core. There's an expression that I use because it's mainstream, but I don't like using it, which is your future self. And there is no such thing as your future self. There is you in the future. Who we are core never really changes. I know it doesn't matter what level of how many bestsellers I have or what level of fame. I hate roller coasters. Not doing it.
And you're gonna
I
continue to
like
hate roller
on
coasters.
a warm. I don't like surprises. Okay, so all of those things. So when you talk about moving forward into the future, it's really easy to get caught up in what we're doing. So a wedding at the end of the day is an event that you do. Being married is a state.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to get the two confused. So, um, and that's where family can be so grounding, particularly small children. I remember I came back from a trip to New York, and I had the privilege of working with Randy Zuckerberg for a number of years in her leadership school, and it was an amazing time. And at the same time, Tony Robbins had invited me to all his events as his guest, and I was having this really cool time. And I remember my 15-year-old son at the time came to the airport to welcome me home. I'd be away for a few weeks with my husband. And I went to the airport, and he's a lovely boy. He said, "Oh, Mum, how was your trip?" I said, "Oh, it was great, James. I did this and I did that and did the other." And he said, "Yeah, I'm really glad you're back. I've got this weird food stain on my pants, and they're my favorite pants, and I just can't get it out. And you know those crackers you make for me with spread that I take to school? I just can't get it right. I'm really glad you're home." And I thought, wow, that is a beautiful lesson of who you are is not what you do. So the first thing I would say with if anyone listening to this feels like they're getting a little distracted is who are you and what is driving you? What you're actually doing is an activity that you bring your humanity to. It doesn't define you, but it also doesn't limit you. All of us, everyone on the planet, every single thing we do, every interaction we have with every other human being matters. I can't tell you, I had such a lonely time when I was going through cancer treatment, and I found it because my relationship was disconnected. I had two children under 5, so couldn't talk to them at all about cancer, would freak them out. So I used to chat to strangers, and I would go into a shopping centre and buy something, and I was buying a new perfume, and the woman said to me, "Oh, are you feeling like a change?" I said, "No, I want to wear a perfume while I'm having I want to wear a perfume while I'm going through chemo that once chemo's over, I will never wear again, because I don't want to tarnish my favorite perfume with going through this really incredibly difficult time." And she was lovely, and I had the nicest chat to her. And I walked away and thought, I will never meet you again. And you will not know that right at that moment, you were the angel I needed. You were the support I needed, and you have changed my life. And this is 20 years ago now, and I still remember her. So I think the most important thing, whether it's our relationships, whether it's fantastic events, let me tell you, whether it's an Olympic gold medal ceremony or seeing your book on the bestseller list, it lasts for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then it's done. And then you go back to being yourself. And then you go back to hopefully being comfortable with being you.
One of the most powerful lessons that I've personally gone through when I was doing meditation certification through the Chopra Foundation, and we went through this whole I am series
Mm.
and we would strip away. So the I am would just say I am, and then you say your first and last name. I've expanded it because I know people like to say I'm a mom, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, right? So I say take all of the things that you define yourself to be and just let's sit with that and say it silently to yourself. I am a bestseller, right? I am a #1 bestseller. And then take away that #1 bestseller. Then you say, I am Elizabeth Gold, and you constantly repeat that. Take away your surname, I am Elizabeth. Take away your first name, and all you're left with is I am. And when you're left with the I am, all of those other things were just a part of the journey, but that's not who you are. And getting people to strip away, it's like in churches, we lead with the title, so much so that we begin to call people by their titles. Hey,
Mm.
Reverend. Right?
Yeah.
So now
Yeah.
the person's no longer James. all right, is Reverend. And then when you approach him and say, "Hey, how you doing, James?" Don't call me that. Well, that's who you are. And then when if something if you fall into some negative bias or you fall into some kind of scandal, you say, "Well, I'm human," but no, you was Reverend all these other years. and you and you've allowed yourself that you don't allow ourselves when we lead with our titles or when we lead with our accomplishments, we don't allow ourselves grace to really truly fall into who we are, and to the point where, which I thought was really funny, and it helped me to go through this whole process. And I was going through some really a real dark time when I was doing this certification, and it really helped me. I remember sitting on the floor crying and carrying on all that stuff. And here I am supposed to be learning, but I'm healing at the same time, right? And then I was listening to the Howard Stern show, and they began laughing because um, Rocky Entourage calls him champ. Now here it is, Rocky never boxed. All right, Sylvester Stallone, right? He's not even Rocky, but we know him as Rocky. But his camp calls him champ. He never was the real champion,
Mm.
but he identifies as Rocky, and those around him identifies with him as champ. And then they started going down the rabbit hole where the guy who plays Superman was in the senior citizens facility, and was dealing with loss of memory, but he would put on his cape and stand out the window.
Oh, wow.
And these are real life stories. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. What would you say as the year is here and people are trying to really define their years? Right? How can you get people to just slow down and just take those small steps towards your aims, or visualize back towards where you are today?
That's a lovely question. I really love this time of year because it can be so reflective, and reflection can be very, very powerful. And I'm actually doing some work on this at the moment, and I'm releasing a which will be available. But I'm just releasing a small workbook on whether you should reset or reframe,
Mm,
because a lot of people get to the end of the year and they make a decision, particularly the female founders that I work with, they make a decision based on overwhelm, which is, this isn't working, I need to change everything. And sometimes you do, but sometimes it's more of a reset. I think it's very powerful at this time of year. Firstly, when I'm preparing for a new year, I write down 20 things I'm proud of from the year before.
mm,
And when I first did this, and my long-suffering husband, he gets to try everything first. I said, "Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to write down 20 things that we were really proud of last year." And he said, "20? Really?" I said, "Oh, come on, you'll be fine." And I go through it too. You get to 5 and you think, "Oh." Then you get to 10, then you get to 12, and then you're flying, and then you usually hit 30. But I think it's so easy to beat ourselves up for what we didn't do on that dreaded to-do list, what we didn't get done, what we should have get done. Oh, look, I failed at this. I'm still 5 kilos overweight, etc., etc., etc. So let's just do not start from that part of your brain. Let's start from everything you did get done. And then let's look at the next year as a year full of possibilities that you can't possibly imagine. There's a lot of material about manifestation. There's a lot of material now about neuroscience and manifestation. And the two things you cannot choose is how and when, because the universe, God, does not work that way. But you can choose what and why. So for everyone listening that's going into this reflective period, what is it you want to be, and why? What is your inner justification that? Because if you can harness the passion, and usually the most effective way to harness the passion is to understand the impact and the contribution you will make on others. If you can harness that, you will be unstoppable next year.
well, everyone, I told you we set you at the feet of the masters as we aim to evolve lives through conversations like this. All of Elizabeth's information is in the description on our website, walkingvictory.me. She has a landing page there. On the landing page, there's links to the book, links to the website, Let's go and be supportive as we define our what's and whys, and not just towards aiming towards where we or when, because we don't have control over that. My last
They know.
my last question for you: besides your book, what books have impacted you? It could be fiction or nonfiction, uh, that you would recommend to others.
Oh, goodness. So many beautiful books, but one stays in my mind because I read it when I was in my early 20s, and it stayed with me for a very long time, and it was called Care for the Soul,
Mm,
and it's a beautiful book. Are you familiar with
yeah,
it, Naran?
yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful book. It was written, a long time ago, but it really what was so powerful for me is it really reinforced the concept of that everyone has a soul, and it is a living, breathing thing, space, state, probably state is a better word, and you do need to care for the soul. The other book I would recommend, particularly for anyone who is going through a challenging time, and at this festive time of the year, that can really make challenging times even more challenging. And that is a beautiful book, which I'm sure you're also familiar with, called When Bad Things Happen to Good
Mm,
People. Not why bad things happen to good people, because bad things happen to good people all the
yeah.
time. But it is a beautiful book, and I read that after a particularly challenging time, and I was very grateful for that.
Well, there you have it, everyone. You can decide to walk with your head down, making excuses, looking at your past, or agonizing your future, or you can be positively present about your why and your where, or your what, your why and your what. As you join us in a victory walk, Elizabeth is now a part of the Walk in Victory family, and you are too. We don't ask you for cash outs, Venmos, Zells, Apple Pays, none of those things. We lead with value because we believe that it's better to give than it is to receive. But we do want to receive your likes and your subscriptions because it helps these conversations to be heard by people all over the world. So if you're on a platform where you can also leave a review, do so. 5 stars preferably, and say something nice. Or you can go to our website and do the same thing. Enjoy the rest of your day. Don't walk with your head down, walk with your head up, but most of all, walk in victory. Peace.